Thank you, Ismail. Good evening, everyone. Greetings and peace. Assalamu alaikum from North Carolina, where I am. It is a distinguished honor and a really pleasure to be with your community again. Kudos to Mosaic Foundation and kudos to their noble work, Ismail and his team, a bunch of Turkish delight in Colorado, doing so many wonderful things all at once. And if you can, please open your camps. We are not a judgmental people, even if you are going through bad hair day or bad furniture day, whatever you are going at home. In order to build a community, it's so difficult to speak to empty screens. As much as possible, if you are comfortable, please share. And it is particularly joyous for me to be able to speak about the pastoral care, Muslim literature in responding to the emotional, psychological, sexual, familial, and collective needs of the modern 21st century, everybody, but especially the Muslim community, because that's what I came to the United States to study about 20-some years ago. That was my goal. I was a special student in 1998 at University of Pittsburgh. Therefore, I will always be a lifelong Steelers fan, and I will put ketchup into anything and everything. At University of Pittsburgh, what I realized, I was there only for one semester for a particular degree program for relief and humanitarian work. I was already an imam working in Southeast Asia for a faith-based humanitarian work. But being a qualified imam on campus in 1998 in a pre-9/11 America, I think, given the age average, you remember there was a life before 9/11, and Islam was at best an exotic Oriental religion. At worst, nobody knew anything much about it. But when I walked to your Pittsburgh campus, I immediately was pulled into university chaplaincy meetings because I was leading Friday prayers. I was recognized by the Muslim community to become their spiritual and religious leader. And I found out for the first time a group of chaplains, men and women, holding religious leadership on a university campus. And in addition to their confessional, theological, scriptural training, they also went through additional pastoral care training, which really blew my mind. It really fascinated me. And that's why many years later, I came to the United States to do my graduate work at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut to become a clergy with an additional training in behavioral science, psychology, and pastoral care. Honestly, until 1998, the only chaplain I knew was Charlie Chaplain. And as you know, he is a nice guy, a British guy who didn't like us Americans much, but in his own rights, he was a nice person. I had no idea about this profession. And it's an incredibly exciting field that was born. What I hope to do, maybe I should provide a map. I want to briefly, because there are a few here, they may or may not know what pastoral care or chaplaincy is, and a very brief summary of the field itself, and how I see Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, and the historical founder of Islam, is a primary example in which, through his incredibly strong legacy and impact on any Muslim's life around the world, 1.7 billion of us, his examples, the life that he has led, makes him just a natural chaplain of his time. He was a prophet, he was a messenger, he was a chief of staff, he was a politician, he was a head of state. In addition to all of his different roles, he was also a chaplain. He was also a pastoral care provider. And I will give you a few examples of his ministry and how, in what way it can inform some of the conversation that I would like to have within the Muslim community, or broadly speaking, within the pastoral care literature. We can benefit from the wisdom and the light of Muhammad from 1400 years ago. So pastoral care as a field was born in response to secular psychology. As a post-Enlightenment product, when separation of church and state became one of the central outcomes of European modernity, when religion was pushed into the margins of society, secularism, nationalism was born, when science was primary source of information, and the impact and the influence of the church was incredibly limited and confined to the four walls of church, where there was a push into seeing religion a bunch of dogmas and creed and maybe a bunch of rituals, but it all needs to take place within the four walls of the church, and church should have no impact in any part of public sphere, especially in science. And when secular science was born, really one of the pillars was what famously Nietzsche said: God is dead. So religion has nothing to offer into post-Enlightenment world, and gradually educated people, scientific people, enlightened people, modern people, modern Europeans was going to divorce religion and disconnect themselves from every aspect of religion. But as you know, that didn't happen. I have a t-shirt, maybe I should have wore. It says, God is dead, Nietzsche, and then Nietzsche is dead, God. Of the two statements, the first one proven not to be true, because the religion, God is not dead and religion has not disappeared. If anything, religion has continued in an increased fashion in some parts of the world, including the United States, to shape human experience beyond the four walls of the churches and the synagogues. The long story short, when secular psychology, through Freud and others, when they try to understand human intellect, human soul, and address some of the psychological, mental, emotional, sexual problems that modern humans are facing, of course, church couldn't resist to give a religious response, especially the Protestant church. To make the long story short, what we know as pastoral care literature is the Protestant initially started as the Protestant churches attempt to give a religious response, a biblical response, informed by scripture, shaped by the legacy of Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, claiming that you cannot talk about human soul, you cannot talk about mental health and well-being of human being without talking about God and scripture and the divine revelation of God's message to the humanity. And it was incredibly successful because churches and religions are, even before Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism, the ancient wisdom and accumulated wisdom in relating to the world of unseen. You can treat physical body, but how do you treat emotion? How do you treat emotional pain? How do you respond to minor depression, to clinical depression, to OCD, to all sorts of mental health challenges that human beings have suffered throughout the centuries, but especially in the modern world? So pastoral care literature was born in a way to reimagine, redesign, reinterpret, and reinvent the Judeo-Christian tradition in the Protestant fashion and develop a set of teachings and kind of religious leadership that is not typical congregational leadership. It is not a typical priest and a pastor role that somebody will provide in a church or a mosque or a synagogue, but somebody who will hold an institutional religious leadership role. And in addition to leading religious services, they will accompany any individual, men and women, who would like to understand the big questions of life, death, grief, loss, etc. And soon after the emergence of the pastoral care literature in the Protestant church, Catholic Church, of course, was not too late to join. And the Catholic communities all around the world, but especially in Western Europe and the United States, also has introduced into their religious leadership training seminaries and the Divinity School, which gave rise, in light of modernity and in light of secular religious studies, and in light of rising modern medicine and modern psychology, has gave a religious response to human mental and emotional problems. And the third people into the party was the Jewish community after emancipation in Europe, and later on through the declining anti-Semitism in Western Europe and the United States, particularly after Holocaust. Jewish community and Judaism with its ancient wisdom, has joined into the literature. They claim this Catholic and Protestant field of study and the way in which they teach and train their religious leaders, and they gave incredibly profound, increasingly profound Jewish response through the teachings of Tanakh, through the teachings of Halakha, to give how, in what way, a religious psychology in the Jewish sense, how Torah, Tanakh, and Moses can be a source of pastoral care in the 20th century. So Muslims are the latest to join the party, and it's very Muslim to be late to any party in general. It's a typical Muslim time. If you want to understand, like, a lot of people are scared in the United States, Muslims are coming, Sharia is coming. I always tell them, don't worry, even if they are coming, they will be late. And by the time they arrive, the problem will be resolved anyways. So Muslims, especially after 9/11, given the kind of spotlight has turned onto them, Islam as a religion evolved from an unknown, mysterious, exotic religion of the East and Orient, overnight, literally, has turned into a religion of violence, killing, barbarism, and savagery. And neither the American Muslim communities nor the Americans in general, they were not ready for that overnight transformation. And for most Americans to be introduced in any serious fashion about Islam and Muslim through the heinous, treacherous, tragic terrorist acts like 9/11 and many others. After that, of course, they developed this inevitable negative views and low feeling temperature towards Islam as a religion and Muslims, as people gave another external push to the Muslim community to redefine their place in America, build institutions, train their religious leaders in the United States instead of importing from Muslim majority societies. That in itself was painful, has been painful. It is not easy. Muslim communities are facing increasing amount of anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia in the United States. But one of the eventual blessings of this Islamophobia, my previous conversation at Mosaic was about this, and I can say more. In so many ways, this crisis, post 9/11 ugly reality in the United States has made emotional, mental, and psychological needs of the Muslim communities and desire and demand for kind of religious leadership not only will just lead people in prayer, but also will provide this enormous challenges to especially born and raised second and third generation American Muslims, so that they can connect to Islam in this cloud of fear and suspicion and still remain committed to Islam and preserve their integrity as they practice this religion as an American religion. That eventually gave rise to this incredible, intense push to produce more literature, more scholarly work in the areas of Muslim pastoral care literature. I hope that 15 minutes background, historical survey and timeline will be helpful. So who are these people? Seminaries, divinity schools, imams, and chaplains like myself. We are now in the business of simultaneously doing two things: approaching the teachings of Islam and the Quran and the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, and try to sift through and filter through the teachings that will be open to reinterpretation and innovation, and it will be a source of comfort, source of empowerment, source of healing, source of repair to 21st century American Muslims. But at the same time, inevitably, that's what prudent strategy requires us, wisdom is required us, swallow as much as possible the pre-existing Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish pastoral care literature and make the cultural translations, learn from the methodology, learn some of the strategies that these previous communities who are 100, 150 years ahead of this conversation to make Judaism and Christianity more accessible in charging the spiritual, emotional, and psychological batteries of the 21st century people. In this, I argue in my scholarly work that Muhammad as a chaplain, turning the image of Muhammad, in addition to having so many different images, into, in the 21st century, a chaplain, not a Charlie Chaplin, but chaplain in the sense that American society and American community knows. For many immigrant Muslims, maybe this profession is still very new, still sounds and feels and smells too Christian, too white, too Western. But as we indigenize Islam in the United States, and we will, as we build more currency into American mainstream, including American academia, including American religious studies and religious training experience, we have to develop this field because this is quite essentially an American experience. I once in a while, God forgive me, I speed when I drive. 2-3 times I was speeding. I will never forget. A very nice policeman or policewoman, they would stop me, they would look into my ID. And once they find out that I'm a clergy, I'm a chaplain, it happened at least 4 times. It's unbelievable, the level of reverence, the level of respect, and level of forgiveness to just let me go with a citation. I didn't abuse the system. And then in that 5-minute conversation, talking to me about their divorce problems and marital problems, and their pet died a couple of days ago, and they are looking for some words of wisdom and comfort. And I have seen how chaplaincy has been part and parcel of social fabric of the American society, from White House, where I work, and the congressional, both House and the Senate, each has chaplains, from all the way higher decision-making mechanisms of our capital, Washington, D.C., to our prison system, to our military system, to our police system, and now even our corporate system, that many big companies, especially tech companies in the Silicon Valley and Seattle, they are hiring chaplains in order to sustain a spiritually and emotionally nurturing environment to provide this into their employees as well. Okay, this enough of history and introduction of the, I hope you are as excited as I am, because indigenizing American Muslim identity will partially depending on whether we are going to make American Islam as American as apple pie, will be depending on partially its ability to train their religious leaders into the American context and equip them with the set of skills that will respond to the needs of the American Muslim communities, especially those who are born and raised in the United States. What I have been doing with my colleagues, and to my delight and surprise, half of them are female religious leaders, female chaplains, is to reflect on the legacy of Muhammad, who was the receiver of the Quran and who was the deliverer of the Quran, God's final testimony and message to the humanity. And in what ways and what episodes of his life can be a source of chaplaincy or the beginning and the emergence of Muslim pastoral care literature. One of the quite essential or central aspect of chaplaincy and pastoral care literacy is to be a leader, to be a personality, to build your character formation in such a way that your religious authority or the way you teach religion and provide religious services is almost absolutely and exclusively judgment-free. That you suspend all your judgments, your understanding of law, interpretation, social norms. It's important. But in a situation of pastoral crisis, your reaction is not whether or not this is Islamic law permissible or compliant, whether or not this makes you a better Muslim or not Muslim. Your initial response has to be to freeze your judgments and suspend your judgments and immediately reflect and find out strategies to attend the crises of the individuals who may be suffering from minor emotional harm and hurt to all the way to very critical life and death situation. as somebody bleeding, lost an arm in an ER room, when they arrive for the medical team, they wouldn't ask any stupid question about their financial background or their religion, their identity, how religious and pious they are. In a way, spiritual pain and emotional hurt is similar. That the attitude, the general posture, the general reflection is no judgment. When somebody is approaching you as a domestic violence victim, when somebody is approaching you because they are in a toxic relationship with their boyfriend and girlfriend, so you have to freeze your legality, your normality, your otherwise what you think about their behavior, and has to find out a way within the religious tradition, from the love and mercy and compassion and forgiveness of God. You have to tap into that oceans of beautiful Islamic literature, Islamic language, Islamic articulation of, in that moment, what is the wise thing to do. And Muhammad, I can give many different examples, is really the incredible exemplar. When a drunk person approached him, when a transgender person approached him, when a woman who was beaten by her husband was approached him, when somebody who was struck with intense grief approached him. There are several examples of his life. In his role as a chaplain, the Prophet of Islam was able to create a judgment-free zone, and in that bubble attend the immediate healing and the repairing of the soul. So this is one area where Islamic literature is incredibly rich. I really hope, if you haven't, I will put it up here, the legacy of the Prophet. It is at 3.5 hours. Ismail, if you can find the link and maybe share in the chat. If you know nothing about Muhammad, please watch this 3.5 hour summary, which is an incredibly successful summary of the Prophet Muhammad and his legacy and how it's affecting and shaping 21st century Muslims. Second category, Muhammad in his lifetime, peace be upon him, has climactic success in behavioral change. There is no other leader, including Jesus, Moses, Buddha, in their lifetime, in such a short period of time, in addition to their religious success, their so-called secular success in changing human behavior. There is no any other leader. It is very difficult to change. It's very difficult to quit smoking. It's very difficult. Of course, you don't see lose weight because you only see me chest up, not chest down. Lifelong struggle. Changing human behavior is another area of chaplaincy and pastoral care literature. In a way, the pastoral care literature is primarily a long-term investment in behavioral change through the change of ideas in the minds of people, which is the only sustainable change. If you want individuals and societies and collectives to change, you can't change them by trying to force their behavioral change. You can't change their actions unless they change the ideas that they have in mind. Muhammad famously say, in the beginning of time, Sufis tell these stories over and over again, that when God created everything, the birds, the animals, birds didn't have wings. They didn't know how to fly. And one day, God descended as a source of light from heavens to the earth, and God played music. God played heavenly melodies, godly music and tunes to these birds for a brief period of time. Back then, birds didn't have wings. They didn't know how to fly. And then after God went back to the heavens, when that music stopped, out of that desire, out of that longing, out of that incredible burning desire to be closer to the heavens and wanting to hear that godly and heavenly music again, birds started spreading wings. Birds started to learn how to fly. So in a way, chaplaincy and pastoral care and the religious teachings in touching human behavior are these heavenly melodies, these musics. And Muhammad was incredibly successful in replaying and rearranging, working with the people to reconnect them to this tune of music, get this heavenly music into their ears and their soul so that they can spread the wings and legs and walk into the direction that they need to walk. I will give one example. There is hardly anything unique about Islam. Anything about like Islamic has its roots in Judaism and Christianity. 5 daily prayers, fasting, no pork, wearing hijab. Look at Virgin Mary. He looks like pretty much my wife and Ismail's wife. But one thing maybe unique to Islam is the complete prohibition of alcohol. Complete and absolute banning of alcohol altogether. And Muhammad was born and raised in a completely alcohol-consumed society. In 9 years, he was able to run one of the most successful addiction recovery campaign of his community by replacing the ideas in their mind about addiction and alcohol. And in 4 different stages of the revelation, alcohol was not banned over time. There were 4 different verses of the Quran in 9 years of period of time revealed in different phases, discouraging believers to stop drinking, primarily not because alcohol is categorically evil, but because there's a portion of our community who have no defense system into alcohol. I am a son of an alcoholic. My father died at the age of 42 because his liver's messed up. He died out of cirrhosis. When I heard for the first time that Islam says no to alcohol, that was my first attraction to the religion to begin with. In a way, Islam acknowledges there is some good in alcohol and bad in alcohol, but there is a portion, a minority of our community, when alcohol is easily accessible and cheap and available, the people who consume this excessively, not moderately, will destroy their lives and the lives of the people around them. And if Islam really figured out one thing or a few things, this is one of them. Just go to Harvard Medical School's review. They quantitatively trace the role of alcohol, the percentage of alcohol's contribution into 9 categories of social problems: depression, incest, rape, traffic accidents, and various other. We are paying a huge price, and alcohol's contribution is incredibly significant. So in a way, Islam says, just for the sake of protecting this minority so that we can have a collectively just and moral societies, we need to get away with alcohol altogether. And in 9 years, I can give several specific examples. Muhammad as a chaplain, Muhammad as someone who puts different ideas, who removes and eliminates bad ideas about bad behavior, and then replace them with good ideas that results, that manifest in behavioral change, individually and collectively. He ran one of the most successful and effective and impactful addiction recovery in the history of religious communities. We so much need this example of Muhammad as a chaplain. And so many of us are one or other form of alcoholic, either workaholic, alcoholic. Addiction runs through the veins of American society. And here is the wisdom of Muhammad, 14 years prior, the light of Muhammad with very sophisticated strategies of facilitating, empowering, and nurturing behavioral change and addiction recovery by the changing of the mind, which is a fascinating topic. I think oceans of literature could be written in this as well. 3 other areas which I will not go in detail because I really would like to engage with your questions as well. Another rich set of raw material in the life of Muhammad is his ability to do very successful grief counseling. Incredible. Every time Muslims pray 5 times a day, As the leader of the community, he would lead the prayer. As you know, Muslims pray to a particular direction, so everybody is facing one particular direction towards Mecca and Kaaba. But every time Muhammad, when he finished leading the prayers, he would turn back, his face would scan the hearts and minds of men and women who's following him, praying behind him, and he literally looked for any sign of sadness, any sign of depression, any sign of being down, any sign of being worn out, any sign of being drained out, and he would find out a very sophisticated way of reinterpreting Quranic teachings, again, related to what is joy, what is sadness, what is happiness, how one can recover and climb out of some of the dark holes that life often pushes us into. And there's a whole set of examples through the teachings of pastoral care. Muhammad's life needs to be put under a microscope and analyzed so that we can improve some modern spiritual medicines and drugs into the 21st century Muslims. Another area is advocacy and institution building. How to live a life beyond Sunday morning, how to live a religious life, how to keep the effect and impact of religion. Most of us, with few exceptions, maybe when we go to church, when we are on the pews, when we go to mosque, we behave. But how to behave, how not to be someone who believes in something on Sunday and does something on Monday completely contradicts what they heard a day before. Muhammad find out very sophisticated set of institution building, changing institutional culture, in spreading the impact and influence of religion in daily life, in your dietary practices, in your relationship with your family, in your businesses, in your interaction with the families and the neighborhoods and the municipal structure. As a chaplain, he found out a way how to not understand concepts like grace, forgiveness, love, compassion. These are not switch on and off, instant skills to develop. These are muscles that it takes time to practice and build on. How to design in a system in which people through their personal and professional lives 24/7 will be flexing these muscles and building this grace, values, and virtues that all the religions trying to wire every man and woman, every individual in our societies. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for indulging me in my fascination to pastoral care literature that was born out of Protestant tradition, but now every religious traditions are also working on it. I hope your further exploration and intellectual inquiry about Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him, will add a dimension of his ability to lead a chaplaincy, a ministry, a pastoral care leadership that has so much potential to inform anybody and everybody, but especially the Muslims who follow and who are enlightened by the light of Muhammad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imam Abdullah. Thank you for this enlightening. Now I would like to invite our audience or friends for any questions they may have. You can either type them into the chat or raise your hand or unmute you, ask your question directly to Imam Abdullah.
Beth, go ahead, please. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, what I wanted to say is I really appreciate the part that you said that there's no judgment. A little more than 10 years ago, my mother was dying of cancer, and the chaplain from hospice came. I'm a very aggressive Christian, and he attacked my religion. And told, you know,
oh my God.
And so I really appreciate the fact that you're teaching people no judgment. I thank you for that. I mean, it still upsets me.
My pleasure, and I am really sorry. I am pained this is a primary example of how unqualified people who are not trained and doesn't have the required personality, required credentials, can do more harm than good if they are put in charge of other people's spiritual care. It is disgusting. Another hurt and harm, I don't want to increase your pain. As you know, Afghan refugees are coming. Our Afghan allies are coming. And me and my community working day and night to make sure, at least for those who are lucky enough to come to the United States, to provide as much support, welcome, and hospitality as possible, because these people were our allies. They helped our troops. They put their lives in the line. And a chaplain in a local hospital, a volunteer chaplain, they clearly, like, we are still investigating, he saw their tragedy, their vulnerability as an opportunity to invite them to Jesus Christ. Here is this Muslim refugees running away from a war-torn country, running from one form of religious intolerance, and here facing and being scarred by another form of religious narrow-mindedness and bigotry. Like, really, this is your first thing that you want to offer when people are in crisis, to just convert them to your religion, as if we need more Christians. There are 2 billion Christians and 1.8 billion Muslims, really. Unfortunately, thank you for reminding me, that was one of the other areas. Do no harm is another principle of pastoral care and chaplaincy. Do no harm, like, if you are not in a position to do good, at least you should commit yourself as an ethical, moral human being that you shouldn't do any harm to anyone. I am sorry. I hope that's not the only experience of you and your mom and your loved ones with chaplains. I hope you have seen some of the trained ones. They are a source of pride, not source of shame.
Thank you.
I think we have
Joseph.
a question in the chat, and then we have Joe, who wants to ask a question directly. Can you see the question in the chat, Imam Abdullah?
Do you mind reading? I'm not paying attention to the chat.
Sure, I'll read the question. If you were called to a hospital for a person who was dying and knew it, and was cognitively intact, but didn't expect to live through the week, and you were called by his request to counseling, what kind of filter would you put on his counseling in regards to you being a Muslim? Would you avoid it, knowing that it might interfere with patients' perceptions?
It's a wonderful question, and it's not a hypothetical question at all. For most credible institutions who train chaplains, they require at least 1 unit of CPE, clinical pastoral education. I did 4 units of it. You have to spend for each unit 400 hours of pastoral care training in the practical sense. You are at the hospital under the supervision of very skilled and highly sophisticated trainers, and then you became a chaplain. In the 4 units, I had hundreds of occasions where I was called somebody in this kind of life and death situation, and I was the chaplain. I was the chaplain to the patient. I was the chaplain to the loved ones. I was the chaplain to the grieving spouses and children and relatives, etc. My immediate reaction, again, Muhammad has so many wonderful examples in that sense. To make sure, if I'm invited as a chaplain, because at the hospital, you are not exclusively only serving your own fellow religionists. You serve anybody and everybody. There are types of needs in the room. It requires you to put your Muslim identity and label on the side and establish a non-judgmental, non-hurtful presence. The need is to be there, to establish a healing, nurturing, again, non-judgmental presence. That somebody is dying, all they want is a non-anxious presence where you can provide some comfort into highly fearful and anxious environment. And I have done this. I think I improved myself a lot in many situations. My Muslim identity and their Jewish or Catholic or Hindu identity, it became irrelevant. When we were able to connect in the soul and human level, we were human brothers and sisters, and we were siblings from creation. But in some other situations, it requires that the patient's particular religious needs require facilitation. Especially, I face this with Catholic patients. If somebody's dying and they want to receive their last rites and last rituals, I can't provide that. It would be an insult to the injury for a Muslim or a non-Catholic clergy to pretend that they can be jack of all trades and they can just take the Muslim hat and put a Catholic hat. And then my role is to immediately call the chaplain on call and do everything you can to articulate the emergency of the situation and bring the particular chaplain on call, which we have thankfully in most American hospitals ever possible. There was one patient, Jane, a particular subset of Hinduism and Sikhism, very few thousand people in the United States. At the Duke Hospital, I was able to find a Jain clergy and was able to get her there in an hour and a half and make sure my role is not to jump and try to be the hero. My role is to facilitate and welcome whatever need is. And between calling somebody and being there yourself and fulfilling your 100% duties, there are so many different stations. There is no one size fits all. I can give more example, but let me recognize Joseph.
Thank you, Imam Abdullah, and thank you to Mosaic for hosting this. I work within the Jewish community here, and I think it's just so fascinating to hear about the similarities in our traditions, and sort of what motivates my question, which is you mentioned CPE, the clinical or the chaplaincy, the education process for becoming certified to be a chaplain. And I was curious first about how much this historical perspective that you provided is included in that education, because I think it's and I mean that for from you bring up the traditions within Islam that and where that comes from, as well as getting those perspectives from Judaism, from Protestantism, from Catholicism, how much that goes into it. And I also was curious a little bit about how much this this perspective is this shared. I know mentioning your involvement with the Hartman Institute. Is this something that is a part of any exchanges that you do where you're talking to rabbis or talking to clergy from other religions to explain a little bit about this history? Because it feels like it's something, as said earlier, something that's really closely shared, ways that we care for those that are going through difficult times, that are going through end of life. And I feel like it's an area for bonding and understanding, this common role that clergy share in chaplaincy, in providing comfort and providing support.
Thank you for, in 1 minute, asking 9 different wonderful $1 million questions. And in the remaining 5 minutes, I will try to answer all of them. Your first set of questions are spot on. I just shared the ACPE, the National CPE Accreditation website. If you're not familiar with the whole process, please go through. Inevitably, much of these accreditation, training, CPE work is Protestant and Christian. And that's fine. Some of my colleagues or some of my clergy in other faith traditions, they find this difficult, irrelevant, inaccessible. I don't. I think there are so many similarities that we can learn from. More so, some of the very fundamental differences provide incredible contrast. And then your ability to try to understand, like original sin. Much of the ministers coming from Christian tradition, when they try to explain the tragedy, theodicy, suffering in the world, their natural place to go to original sin. There is no original sin in Islam. Islam clearly and fundamentally and categorically rejects that notion. that naturally we are broken. Islam believes problem is nurture, not nature. There is nothing innately broken in some tradition. But my ability to try to see the world through the eyes of my Christian brothers and sisters, how they relate to human suffering through the concept of original sin, in so many ways, made me a better believer in Islam. This ability to make sense of people who are different than you becomes a mirror and shows you and yourself and your tradition in a very different kind of light. So the obvious differences can invite some cheap shots to the field of pastoral care. Like, these are fundamentally different religions. How can one literature develop to help human soul and human tragedy, human healing in one tradition can be relevant and accessible? I cannot disagree more. I think in addition to similarities, differences are there to teach you fundamental human nature, accumulated wisdom, and Abrahamic roots and different branches in so many wonderful ways. In terms of like how representative I am or how commonly my views are shared by the Muslim community, it's hard to know. As you know, Muslims, who is a Jew is a fundamental question. What makes somebody Jew? How do you count Jews? Especially when you do census, when you ask, don't even ask people's religious identity. So it's as messy, if not more messier than the Jewish community, because unlike Judaism, where it has all the possible diversities, especially political and ideological, in addition, Muslim community is also ethnically diverse. Incredibly, every possible race, ethnic background, cultural background is represented. So across all these incredible differences, how much of what I represented here is commonly shared is hard to know. But I would say, especially in the pastoral care front, among the born and raised, I have been a college Muslim chaplain 20 years of my life, almost all my adult life, all my life in the United States. There was no principled opposition to what I presented. On the contrary, there's so much more demand, desire, and that's why I work in many different national organizations, and through that help many prominent American university campuses to establish Muslim life, Muslim centers, fundamentally based on the understanding of pastoral care, not the theology and the law of religion, but the healing power, empowering, nurturing, repairing power of Muslim pastoral care literature. I hope that answers all your 9 $1 million questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for that correction, dutifully noted. I said Christianity is original sin. Even if you don't believe it, I think you would agree with me that Christianity and Christian texts, Christian theology has something to say about original sin. It is understood and experienced and interpreted differently, sometimes in your case, not even believing in it. But the mainstream theological literature, especially those particular verses in Genesis, and then later on in John and Luke, undeniably makes original sin a prominent Christian element, Christian belief. But what Christianity is and what Christians do, what Islam is and what Muslims do, this may or may not be all the time the same and similar thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any other questions?
I am really sorry, but this is not my last Zoom call. I have one more before I go and spend some time with my family. At least you guys are 7:30 dinner time. May God bless all God's creation through grace, through spiritual healing and recovery. May Almighty enable us to be a source of comfort to other people when they are facing difficulty in their lives. Thank you, and God bless you, and thank you, Mosaic Foundation, and I hope you will share the recording once it's available.